Welcome to the fourth Freebie Friday of 2025. I'm Jessica with Stay Cozy Creative Co., and today we're going to be making a heart wreath just in time for Valentine's Day. I first made this wreath about 2 years ago and decided it was time for a refresh for the tutorial, so that's what we're going to be making today. I'm using some of our Ultra Luxe Velvet Tube yarn, and this is one skein of our Snow White color. I'm also using a 10-inch metal craft ring that you can find on Amazon or your local craft store, as well as some fabric scissors. I'm going to be using this pink ribbon to hang my wreath today, but in my past tutorial I used some cotton cord and some wooden beads, so it's really up to you what you want the final look to be. I should also mention that you can find this yarn on my website at staycozyco.com. To get started, we are going to attach our yarn to our metal ring with a simple knot. This just helps hold it in place while we work our way around. And now we're going to make a loop around the ring. So we're going to wrap the yarn around the back side of the ring, up to the front, and then through the yarn itself to make a loop. So I'll show you again. Pull the yarn under the back side of the ring, make kind of a loop, and then tuck the front side of the yarn up through that loop. And we're going to continue this way all the way around the ring, and I'm going to end up making 17 loops. So if you find that you're making a different number of loops, that's totally fine depending on the yarn and the size of ring that you're using, but you do want to have an odd number of loops so that your heart looks symmetrical. You want each loop to be about 1.5 inches long. You don't want to go much bigger than that, otherwise, 1, you might run out of yarn, and 2, your wreath might be a little bit droopy. You could go a little bit smaller, but you really don't want to go too tight, otherwise it makes it difficult to pull our next row of loops through these loops. Make sure that when you're starting a new loop and wrapping that yarn around the metal ring, that it's really snug up against there, because you don't want a lot of extra yarn just kind of hanging out around that ring. So I'm just going to finish this up going all the way around the ring, and then we will start on row 2. As we get all the way around the circle, I'm going to count my loops to make sure I have 17. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. Perfect. So now I'm going to unknot my beginning knot just so that it doesn't stick out. Make sure you don't lose that first loop. And then I'm going to kind of just wrap it around so that it stays snug and secure while I move on. Now we're going to begin our next row. So we're going to put our yarn behind that first loop we made and pull a new loop up and through. So you want it to be about the same size as that first loop. And we're going to do this to the first 4 loops of that row. Once you have those first 4 loops made, we're going to work our way back across the opposite way and make 4 more loops into those same loops. Now that we have 3 rows of loops here, I'm going to lay that first loop down on top of the one next to it, and then pull the yarn up and through both of those loops, forming a new loop. Then I'm going to lay that down on the one next to it and pull a new loop up and through. And then same thing for this final one. So this is kind of like a binding off stitch, and we've now formed the upper right hand side of our heart. So now we're going to make a new loop through that final loop that's sticking out, and this will allow us to reach down to the next loop. So we're going to go down to that next loop on the circle and pull a new loop through there, and then we're going to lay those together and pull a new loop through both of those as a binding off stitch. And now we're going to lay that loop down on top of the one next to it and pull a new loop through both of those to bind those together as well. Here I'm just flattening out the top part of my heart so it's not pulling in too tightly. If yours is, then just loosen up your stitches a bit. So I'm going to do another binding off stitch here, and then one more, and then that should bring me down to the bottom center part of my heart. So you should have 9 open loops still on the left side of your heart. I'm counting here just to make sure. And then this bottom 9th one should be right in the middle. And here I'm going to add 1 loop to that bottom loop to kind of extend it out a little bit. And then I'm going to do the binding off stitch here. And then I'm going to reach up and around and head back up the other side of the heart. Lay that bottom loop down on top of the one next to it and pull a new loop through, and then lay that down on top of the one next to it and pull a new loop through, and then same thing into the next loop, and then one more time into this next one. So you want to have 4 open loops in the top part of your heart to make that upper left hand side. So now we're going to switch to pulling loops into these top 4 loops. So if you remember on the right hand side, we did 3 rows of loops. So I have our first row of loops on this left hand side. I'm working on my second row of loops, and then I will make a third row of loops going back down the other way. And now it's time to switch to our binding off stitch. So I'm going to add 1 loop to that bottom loop that was hanging out, and then I'm going to lay that down on top of that first of my 4 loops for the upper left hand side and pull a new loop through. So here I'm doing the binding off stitching. And if you find that your heart is pulling in too tightly to the center, then just make these top loops a little bit bigger so that it lays more flat. You should be able to see a general heart shape in your wreath right now. So we're going to turn our wreath around so that it's easier to do a binding off stitch up in this top part. Take the last loop that you made and then find the next loop down on the kind of heart shaped and do your binding off stitch there, and then do 1 more into that next loop. And then our next one is going to make that inner point, and so we're actually going to wrap it into the inside of our ring. And so I just laid that loop down and pulled a new loop through, and then now I'm going to work my way back up on the other side. So we're going to do 1 and then 2, and then now I'm going to show you how to finish off your heart so that it looks like a seamless transition. Grab your scissors and we're going to trim our yarn so that you have enough to make 1 final loop. You're going to pull the tail of your yarn up and through to the front, and then now we're going to tuck it under that next loop next to it, under both of those strands, and then back around through where it first came out of. So this kind of makes a faux loop and makes it look like it's seamless all the way around. Now on the back side of your wreath, I'm just tucking in the tail of this yarn so that it can be hidden more easily, and I'm going to finish off the back with some hot glue. If you don't have any glue available to you, you can also sew the ends together, or you can just tuck them into the backside of your wreath so that they aren't visible anymore. But I'm going to cut these down just a little bit so I don't have so much yarn to work with, and then I'm going to open up the tube yarn and trim out some of the inside fluff to make it easier to glue it down. Once I've cut out the inside fluff, I'm pulling the outside of the yarn up and then tucking it in on itself just to make a cleaner end. Then I'm taking the glue and just doing a little bit right into the center and pressing the yarn together so that it closes up the end. This will prevent any fluff from coming out. Then I'm going to find a place for this yarn to be tucked under, so I'm just going to lay it down right here underneath this piece of yarn, put a little bit of glue, press it together, and it's hidden. Then I'm going to do the same thing to the other tail of yarn so that it is closed up and hidden as well. And there we go. We have finished our heart wreath. Now it's time to figure out how we want to hang it. If you want to leave it as is, you could always just hang it on a hook on a door. As I talked about before, you could use some of these beads or some cotton cord, but I'm going to use this bright pink ribbon. You could simply wrap it around the top center part of the wreath, but I want mine to be a little bit hidden, so I'm actually going to tuck it up and through the center point of my wreath. I found a hole in the middle of my wreath and pushed the ribbon through and then just tucked it around back. I realized that this was a little off center here, and so I'm actually going to tuck it underneath this loop here to make sure that it's right in the middle. Okay, that looks better. So I'm going to flip my wreath over and then figure out how long I want my ribbon to be, and just kind of pull it up snugly in there and then trim it to the length that I want. I'm just going to tie a bow at the top of my ribbon so that it's easy to change the length once I put it on my door to see how long I want it to hang. And then we have officially completed our heart wreath. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you've enjoyed this project and that you love this addition to your Valentine's decor or any decor throughout the year. If you've enjoyed this tutorial, please give it a thumbs up and maybe even share it with a friend. You can subscribe to my channel to make sure that you don't miss out on any future tutorials or hand knitting and hand crochet inspiration and ideas. You can shop this tube yarn and other chunky yarns, as well as handmade items that I've made and other tutorials that are available on my website at staycozyco.com. Again, my name is Jessica and I'm with Stay Cozy Creative Co. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, stay cozy, creative, and kind.